Welcome to another episode of our podcast, Men's Stories of Healing and Courage.
Perfect.
So, Sammy, thank you for joining. Happy New Year. It's great to see you again.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. It's great to catch up. So for those folks that are just dialing in, this is the second of our series of podcasts, Stories of Healing and Courage, where we speak to people that have been through some pretty remarkable journeys as it relates to their health and challenges that they've gone through, whether it's physical or emotional or psychological, and all those things typically go hand in hand. If you didn't have a chance to check out our first podcast, Brandy Lozecki, who gave a kidney to one of her family members, and 10 months later, she was actually running in her very first marathon. An absolutely inspiring, remarkable story. Today we have Sam Rossiello with us, who has an equally, if not even more, incredible story that we'll get into. I'll start perhaps with just a little bit of an introduction to our history and how I know Sam, and then the incredible story that he shared with me, the journey that he's been through, and where he is today, which I hope will inspire all of our listeners, not just people that are dealing with physical or emotional challenges, but anyone that wants to aspire towards higher things in life. This is really the story for you. It's really, really quite amazing. So Sam, you and I were colleagues not too long ago, and I think it was in our first or second week. You're an ambitious young guy, and you invited me out to dinner in my neighborhood. You're a big foodie, and asked me to meet you at a local sushi restaurant. And I remember arriving a little bit early and being a little miffed actually that you were about 10 to 15 minutes late, being a junior to me in our professional world. And then you showed up, and we sat down and we started chatting. We were catching up, and just really getting to know each other. I think it was our first week. And then I think 10 minutes or 15 minutes into the conversation, you dropped a bombshell on me, which had me floored and feeling a little bit numb. But do you want to share with our listeners kind of what you shared with me at that moment, and how you kind of revealed sort of what you've been through very recently in your life?
Yeah, I appreciate the commentary about the food as an Italian Jewish mix. That's always a good thing, and the lateness. It's been a resolution every single year. So
right.
But to jump right into the story, back on February 26th of 2016, day which will live in infinite infamy, as they say, I was on the way home from work, and long story short, I was involved in an accident whereby I was struck by a subway train. Subsequently, my legs were crushed under a subway train, had to be rushed to George Washington University Hospital, and my legs were amputated that night. So I'm a bilateral bologna, not to be confused with the deli meat bologna amputee. And that's the skinny.
Wow. So, and Sam, just that your camera is moving a little bit, so it's going to give people some nausea if you keep doing that. So if you can stabilize it a little bit, that'll be better. Much better. Thank you. Absolutely. I was absolutely floored. I don't think I could speak for several minutes when you showed me that, when you told me that. Not only did you tell me what had happened, you actually kind of lifted your pant leg. And I had been working with you for, I think, week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, in a professional environment where I'd seen you every single day, and I had no clue, because you go about your life. At that time, you were going about your life as anyone would, and if you didn't really know what you had been through, you really would have no idea. But then you proceeded to lift your legs, and I saw that you had the prosthetics on in both legs, and I was feeling a little less missed, let's just call it, about the 15 minutes being late. I was feeling very small and shallow, that I felt that way, and automatically felt a huge amount of empathy, sympathy, friendship, and all that kind of stuff. That moment that had happened, you've told me that you have sort of sparse memories and recollections of exactly sort of what transpired. What do you remember? I mean, it's a nightmare that most of us can't even conceive, but you fell and you were hit by a train. What in the aftermath of that do you kind of recall leading up to kind of being in the hospital?
Yeah, well, surprisingly enough, I guess the adrenaline had hit once I was struck by the train. So the first thing I remember is actually laying under the train. I never really lost consciousness. I was
Wow.
laying under a subway train for what seemed like an eternity, but I would say probably about 20-25 minutes while the first responders were getting there. And, I couldn't feel anything. And then don't really remember anything past that. And then probably five or so days in is when I start remembering things, because you have to realize you're on so many pain medications, narcotics, etc. I've been told by my family that I was hallucinating a little bit because I was on so many pain medications. So the drug dial was high, and really the first thing I remember was just the realization that it happened about 5 days in, and just complete and utter dejection.
Wow. So, I mean, I can't imagine as a family member, getting the news about something like this. How was your family informed? And, do they sort of have any stories about, sort of meeting you the first time, sort of in the hospital setting, and what they went through during that period?
Yeah. So they were actually, so they live in New York, Long Island, on Long Island, as we say, we're from Long
Yeah.
Island.
Right.
And they were actually on their way down to visit me that weekend. And they found out, I believe, through one of my friends who had found out somehow. I don't really know how the communications happened, but
Okay.
they were already on their way down. And as you would imagine, utterly destroyed when it
Yeah.
happened. And they luckily my parents both work for incredible people who are close to our family, and who said, take the time to take care of him, whatever you guys need. So they just stuck with me for, I believe it was 7 weeks I was in the hospital dealing with all this.
Wow.
And they were there the whole time. It was incredible.
Amazing. And one of the reasons that I was really excited to, get you on this podcast, I've spent quite a bit of time with you now personally in social settings, and you're a well-read guy. You're an introspective guy. You've been through quite a journey intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually through this journey. And I think a lot of what you've learned is something that a lot of people out there can benefit from. And I think this is where I kind of want to transition into. From sort of the acute period of the trauma, and obviously the incredible toll that takes on you physically, your family, emotionally, psychologically, I'm sure financially as well, the stress of it. If there's just going to be a story in this magazine that you'll be featured in volume 2, and I'd encourage folks that are listening to this, if you want to get sort of deeper into some of the details, you could download that from our website at men.me. My brother also had a pretty serious accident. He fell from an 80-foot waterfall, and had 8 surgeries to repair his body. And there's a multi-dimensional toll that it takes on you. Recovering from that is not easy. You've been through an absolute amazing journey that is incredibly inspiring. So can you just talk a little bit about sort of just building Sam back up into a person, the physical therapy part, the nutrition part, the psychological part? What was that journey like? What did you have to do?
Yeah. So the first thing that I'll start with is the hospital. And when something happens of this nature, you are given if you're at a good hospital, a team of doctors, surgeons, occupational therapists, physical therapists. I had, I've made some friends in the therapy dog community who volunteer for a group. They brought therapy dogs in for me. And it just took a whole team of people, because the first thing you're wondering is like, will I ever move again? Will I ever walk again? There were days when we were fighting, and my surgeon was fighting for me, amongst other opinions. if they were going to save my knee or not, which would have been catastrophic. To be a bilateral amputee who's below knee is not easy, but above knee makes it more difficult. So we had some real life decisions that were being made, and we were fighting, you know, to do anything we could to preserve, you know, my legs. I was eating very well. My surgeon instructed me kindly to have my parents forget about the hospital food and go across the street to a nice cafe that had protein bowls, smoothies, everything. And I still lost probably I want to say 40 pounds while I was in the hospital. I
Wow.
was very, very small afterwards because my body was working so incredibly hard just to, you know, maintain the wound sites amongst all the treatment as well.
Right. I imagine the amount of atrophy also in your upper legs that were remaining was probably quite significant in terms of the muscle loss.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that worked was you start off generally occupational therapy heavy, where they're teaching you how to transfer in and out of the bed safely to the wheelchair, to use the restroom, things all, you know, of that nature, basically functional life stuff. And then you start working with a physical therapist as well, who's focusing on helping you preserve some of that muscle mass amongst all the atrophy and things like that. So that was very heavy from the get-go. And then when I was finally released from the hospital, I begun physical therapy as well, pretty intensive physical therapy. I think it was probably 3 or 4 times a week. And then eventually, you know, you find out that you're ready to get fit for prosthetics once the wounds have healed enough. And I made it to the right place, and they've been incredible this whole time. And you've got to continue physical therapy. And I still go to physical therapy. Everybody should go to physical therapy. Everybody
Right.
should be able to go to physical therapy. You know, I'm so fortunate that at the time, my parents' insurance with their work was incredible. And then subsequently, my insurance through work was so incredible. Or else, I don't know if I'd be, you know, sitting here in front of you so happily
Yeah.
today.
So when you go through that sort of the realization that, you know, your legs are gone, and, you know, that part is not coming back. I'm sure that's an incredibly difficult thing to deal with psychologically. But then you're fitted with the prosthetics for the first time, and you're kind of realizing that, hey, I can live a, you know, functional normal life, relatively normal life. That must have felt pretty kind of empowering coming into that really difficult period, I would imagine.
Oh, it was incredible. And, you know, the things that led me up to that, I'll give you another example. Even when I was still at the hospital, they had someone visit me who was a amputee peer visitor. He was a former soldier who lost his leg in combat. And I was so dejected in the hospital, and he sat down and he said, you know, what's going on? I'm running a marathon soon. And I was like, you serious?
Wow.
I can do that? Because I'm sitting in the wheelchair waiting for my wounds to heal.
Wow.
He's telling me he can run a marathon. And then, you know, if you go to the right prosthetics place, the network is just so important of people who are mentors, who are older than me, younger than me, people who box, people who do rock climbing, people who run marathons, people who do Ironmans. Like, it was so important, and it was sort of like a softer thing as part of the recovery, just to see that there are people that can persevere, and that gave me motivation to do the same.
Yeah, and so you know, I think at that same dinner, because I was feeling a whole whirlwind of emotions, and you're a very positive guy, and I think maybe even in that dinner you invited me out to a boxing class. I was like, are you serious? You want to go boxing? And you proceeded to tell me about how active a life you're living.
Yeah.
Can you talk about all the amazing things you're doing, from rock climbing to boxing now, and sort of, you know, how you got yourself back physically to that place where you're able to do not only just kind of live functionally, but do really, really incredible things physically?
Yeah, and I'm honestly wondering, you know, I'm very thankful that early on in my life, before the accident, I was a workout-aholic. I was, you know, lifting, running, loved playing, you know, intramural sports, high school sports, everything of the sort. So I kind of had that ingrained in me. and when things went, sour, like the accident, I think one of the things that really got me back so quickly was not only a little bit of stubbornness, but also my general like drive that I had already, muscle memory, everything like that. So I would say the recovery was generally easier than a lot of people who don't live an active lifestyle. But since the accident, I started off, I want to say in July of 2016, so about 4 or 5 months after the accident. I started running on walking legs. So if anyone's not familiar, there are special legs for running that have a larger curve on them, and you don't wear sneakers with. It's like a larger blade, which I was fortunate enough to have received in a grant this year, because not everyone is able to get them. It's an out-of-pocket cost that is astronomical, and generally insurances don't cover. So I was able to get those. But I started running. I was raising money for a charity that has a lot of adaptive runners and bikers. And I ended up raising somewhere along the lines of $10,000 between myself and my network. And I ran a 5K in November of 2016. So about 8.5 months after the accident, on walking legs, which were a little heavier and more difficult. But I had people who would help me in the hospital. I had my surgeon, I had my physical therapist, I had all my friends running beside me. And the network is very important, and they were amazing, and they really stepped up. So many people have stepped up throughout this period of time. Since then, I've gotten into rock climbing, boxing, a little Krav Maga, regular weightlifting. Recently picked up golf, actually. Been golfing a little bit.
Absolutely amazing. And for those, again, and what we'll do is we'll ask our editors to throw some pictures of Sam just being the active athlete that he is, sort of also to throw some pictures when we're talking about the accident, some of those photos, just a second, bring it to life. But it really is truly remarkable and amazing when you meet him, spend some time with him, feel the positivity and the energy, and then look at just how robustly he's living. But Sam, you've also conveyed to me that it's not all rosy, right? There are difficult days and difficult challenges, and you've been through plenty of those. Maybe just talk about some of those. And I know recently when we've had conversations, you've gone pretty deep philosophically with me on sort of, where you've ended up through that process. And I'll just have to say, in fact, you said it to me as a colleague once, is, learning is a two-way thing. You said that to me as some of those, at that time, sort of working with me, that as I fully expect to learn from you, but I think you can learn some things from me as well. And that certainly is true. You've been through a pretty amazing learning journey. So it hasn't always been rosy. There's been some challenges that you've gone through recently. Can you just talk a little bit about some of that, and then and sort of where you are today? You're in a really great place. We'll transition into that. We'll end with some final thoughts.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So one thing I would definitely like the listeners to know is that, the visual perception is not necessarily reality, right? One thing that's so interesting, that's even happened to me, is inspiring stories can actually uninspire certain people and make them unmotivated, and say, oh my God, you've been through so many things, Sam. Like, how could I possibly be upset right now if you've dealt with what you've dealt with? And I do want the listeners to understand that the perspective that I had to build very early on in that process has made me the person that I am. And, I don't like comparing other people's stories and situations to my own, because again, like I've said to so many people, if the worst thing that's ever happened to you, according to you, is that your grandmother passed away, then that's all you know, right? You can hear stories and you can hear other things, but I wouldn't say that the battle is with other people. The battle is with yourself. And there's so many things that happen in someone's life that will make them upset and make them sad. And I just want to let you know that you can be sad. You don't have to say, I shouldn't be sad because I have so many friends, or I shouldn't be sad because of this. But things I've dealt with, the physical frustration I've dealt with, skin issues that have caused me to not be able to walk for periods of times. I hurt my leg recently and was on crutches for a while. That was very frustrating. I've had outbreaks of MRSA, which is a type of staph infection that comes back periodically, and I've been immobilized for a while. Randomly, stomach issues that were causing me to vomit, and like all of that was seemed easy at the time because of all the things that I went through at the beginning. That's the perspective that I built in my own story, right? Other things that I've dealt with, I don't wear pants anymore because it's not in my best interest, for the most part. That time
and just
in
so
my
the
life
audience understands that, I want to sort of underscore that. The reason I didn't know you had 2 prosthetics on your legs was because you were always wearing pants when I first met you. And I think what you're saying is at that period in your life, you were trying to conceal sort of this thing. And now you don't care. Whenever I've met you in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it's been, you've been wearing shorts because it's more comfortable for you.
It's more comfortable. I get very warm. As an amputee, you're burning a lot of extra energy. I think they say 70 to 100% more calories than the average person to walk the same distance. But yeah, I mean, I've gone through different phases of confidence, right? And I've realized, at this point that it's not in my best interest to wear pants because I get hot and because I live in New York and people aren't very amenable to you stepping on their toe accidentally, because I can't feel the floor. So often I step on people's toes. Or I've been at a bar where I slipped on a wet floor, and I've had a bouncer grab me by the neck and threaten to throw me out of a bar. And then I show him that I'm wearing pants and I pull up my leg and he says, oh wow, I'm so sorry, right? So it's easier to just put the cards out on the table. Other things that have happened, I mean, I've dealt with, many existential crises, like, could anyone ever love me for looking the way I do, or having dealt with anxiety and depression before. And there's so many things related to that just cause anxiety. I guess the one thing that, I realized, and 2 things actually, one was said by my uncle, who has given me a lot of advice over the years, is, everybody adapts, right? Like you told me you broke your foot about a year ago, right? You were dealing with some things when you broke your foot. Older people often deal with back pain, leg pain. You may have sprained an ankle. Everybody's adapting. So don't focus on what everyone else is doing. And I was worried about, friends who are hiking Machu Picchu, or, going to Southeast Asia, which I had been to before, which would be very difficult on prosthetics. And I was afraid that I would never be able to go. And I just, my uncle just said, what if the happiest place is right where you are right now? What if you never leave New York again? What if you never leave the United States again? And the people that you're with are the happiest that you'll be. And that was really enlightening. And the other thing is, I guess I always thought that for someone to love me, they would have to do it, dealing with the fact that I was an amputee almost as a negative thing. But with recent developments, meeting my girlfriend earlier this year, she didn't even know I was an amputee when I met her, because I happened to be wearing pants that day. And then we had to have a conversation a few weeks later. But, when I finally told her, she was like, you're the most incredible person I've ever met. And I didn't feel like I had to, make up for a fault, right? It wasn't a fault. It was just a thing that is
amazing, Sam. It's I think a perfect segue to sort of our close, because I think one of the things my brother also says, and folks will see this in the article in the magazine that Sam is going to be in, is that, when you deal with disfigurement, that's one of the things that's kind of always looming is, will someone accept me with this new, the new reality? And you're now in a wonderful new relationship. It sounds like an amazing person that you've told me about. So what are your next steps? What are your aspirations in life now? You've got a lot to share, a lot to tell. You're an inspiring person. Where do you go next with all of this?
Yeah, well, I think as tough as the story is, and the anxiety leading up to telling these stories are, this podcast or any times prior I've posted anything on social media, I feel this element of, you know, just this giant weight coming off me afterwards.
Fantastic.
So I think sharing the story is very important. I recently was certified as a peer visitor through the Amputee Coalition, so I can now visit people in the hospital like my friend did way back when, and tell them that everything will be okay and that you can, you know, persevere. Perhaps some sort of mentoring, coaching. Currently working in the consulting technology space, so maybe combining those two worlds. But you know, I think just living my life happily and in a balanced way, right? Like the thing that we've talked about a lot is, you know, I tend to run on 0 to 100 ends of the spectrum, high energy then low energy. Recently have gotten into a strict regimen of meditating, and it just grounds me. And you know, it may feel like a chore to some people, but and it started like that for me. But now that I've done it so many times, I almost get this, you know, feeling of loss when I don't do it. So building these smart, strong habits like sleep, exercise, reading, you know, staying off your phone. I've been working on staying off my phone a little bit more, but building strong habits, continuing to stay strong and balanced, and then seeing where the road takes me.
That's great. Sam, on behalf of Mend, on behalf of I know all of our listeners, I want to thank you for joining us and sharing what is an incredibly powerful emotional story. And it's not easy to talk about going through something like this. You have a lot to offer the world, and I say that very sincerely. I think just listening to this podcast, people will have certainly grasped the depth of your intellect, the depth of your character. And I think you'll do really, really remarkable things for people and create a better world. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your story, and look forward to continuing our friendship and growing it. Thanks, Steph.
Appreciate it, man.
Bye-bye.